Thank you, Kate. Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to learn, as I'm sure you are, about what works in employee engagement and retention. And we have a fantastic panel. The panelists are going to get 15 minutes each to share with them what they know for you. And then we're going to have a 30-minute Q&A. Take notes. You actually have a place to take notes in your folder, a little pad, so you can take notes. And for our first panelist, let me introduce the panelists. Our first panelist, you're going to hear from Tom Morrison. He's going to talk about the results of Deloitte's latest survey of employers and employees done in partnership with Forbes. So Tom is the national service line leader of total rewards in Deloitte's human capital practice. And Tom's here today from Philadelphia. Our second panelist is Denise Spencer. She's the VP of Human Capital at AAR MRO Group, an airline servicing company. Denise is here from Miami, and she'll give you an employee engagement and retention and performance roadmap. Our final panelist is Cindy Durning. She's an SVP of HR and Employee Services for Scholastic. Cindy will tell you her observations based on over 20 years of executive-level experience in publishing, financial services, retail, and education, and not-for-profit. And I just want to remind you, too, during the Q&A that you are part of the panel as well. We want to hear from you about what you've learned, and feel free to share your experiences and, of course, ask questions. Okay, so I'm going to bring up our first panelist, which is Tom Morrison. Tom, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to the 5 O'Clock Club for inviting me to join you today. Saying to Denise and Cindy, this is the first time I've spoken on a weekday where I had people in the choir pews. So if I need an hallelujah, you're on. So I'm supposed to eat the mic. I guess I'll bend over at 6'2". There is a report in your packet that's indicative of the kind of data that we as Deloitte perform for our client organizations. For about the past 3 years, we've done what we call the Talent 2020 series of survey reports. And what's different about Talent 2020 is that it's not just an online survey, it's not just a mail-in survey, it's actually us working with Forbes research to go out and have hands-on conversations with people inside of organizations, both inside of HR, at the C-suite level, CEOs, COOs, et cetera. And in the case of the research that I'm about to walk you through a bit today, that we're actually just releasing this week, of actual employees to talk about their indicative actions that they see within this economy. So I will encourage you, the main thing you want to put in your notes is to go to www.deloitte.com, search for Talent 2020, and it will take you to the entire series of reports. And by this point, we've done about, I think this might be the 5th that we've done in the past number of years. And I think you'll find them all of great interest. So when we talk about gaining the employee perspective, I should first talk about what we've gained when looking at the employer perspective over the past couple of years. The first thing to keep in mind is that obviously we all saw astounding impacts from the Great Recession. And that impacted obviously all of our strategies and our expectations going forward. What's interesting right now is we certainly are all seeing, and I'm sure you could tell me stories about this talent paradox we're seeing. When we released our last report in January, we actually found in conversations with our clients that in the US alone, we are seeing 3.4 million unfilled jobs at a time when unemployment's over 8%, indicating a huge gap between the skills needed to operate in today's workplace and the skills that our candidates are bringing to us every day. And the worst part about it is that these shortages really occur amongst the most skilled workers and the most critical workforce segments that we need to operate our businesses effectively and efficiently. So when we looked at it from an employer perspective, that's the last thing we saw. Now, if we look at it from an employee perspective, we're starting to see some things shift a bit in terms of expectations amongst employees. Our most recent survey surveyed 560 people globally. They were split about 40% in the Americas and about equally amongst EMEA and Asia Pacific. We surveyed every generation, and we surveyed people across every spectrum of company, every industry, every sector, every size. And so this is a very broad cross-section of the employee population out there. What we're seeing very specifically is that companies can't neglect talent and retention strategies because they have a false sense of security that employees have few options in a very tight job market. It's very clear today that the most talented employees have plenty of options and will find those options if we're not serving their needs effectively. And what are those needs? Well, the key findings are people want to see meaningful work. They want to know that what they're doing matters, and that's more important than any other retention initiative you can put forth. Majority of people, 56%, said they'd been seeking new employments because they don't think their current job makes good use of their skills and abilities. Turnover intentions appear to be concentrated among specific groups of employees. So people at certain points in their careers, in terms of the number of years they've been working, really form what we're calling turnover red zones. And they're at very high risk of departure in comparison to their colleagues. Employers need to adjust their retention initiatives to really focus on two talent segments. One is those employees with critical skills that we've already talked about. Second, very important, are the very capable leaders who can advance your company amidst this continuing global economic uncertainty. And the last key finding is that workforce is far more engaged and far more committed. I mean, think about all the money that your organization spend on engagement surveys and commitment work. What were the key drivers of engagement and commitment? Trust in leadership, clear communications about corporate strategy, and belief that leaders have the ability to execute on that strategy. So as you think about all the things, all the efforts that you've made as an organization, think about whether you can honestly sit here in your seat today and think about how you deliver on those three elements. So moving on a bit, I hate to cover this many numbers when we're just talking about them, so I'll try to be somewhat brief, but I have lots of numbers. So as high unemployment persists, as the global economic recovery kind of, stumbles along, we had first had anticipated what we had called in one of our previous reports a resume tsunami, right? I think we were sitting in about 2009 thinking, geez, in just a few years when we get all this stuff straightened out, everybody's going to want a job. Certainly we haven't seen a resume tsunami. We might call it right now a resume riptide. There is certainly a swell out there of the most talented people who are in the market, who are looking for that next meaningful role. In 2011, when we surveyed employees, 65% of people said they were planning to leave their organizations. 65%, that just last year. This year, when we asked the same question of the employee base, 20% report that they plan to leave their employees over the next year. So there's less opportunity for the broad base of employees, but there's still as much opportunity, we feel, out there for the people who are most critical. 46% of surveyed employees have either moved to new jobs, received a promotion, or changed their roles with their current employers during the past year. And so that's one of the things that's led to that decrease of 65 to 20, is because a lot of people actually acted on their intentions. So employees who believe their employers make effective use of their talents, again to this point, appear to be overwhelmingly committed to staying on their job. So of the surveyed employees who plan to stay, 72% feel that their talents are being effectively utilized. So let me say that again. For people who are going to stay, 72% think they're doing a job that meets their skills and abilities. On the other hand, of the people who plan to leave, 42% do not believe that their skills and abilities are being used, and another 20% are neutral on the point. I'd argue that if your people are neutral about whether their skills and abilities are being used, that effectively they're telling you that they're not. So 60+% of people out there are saying, I'm not happy here because you're not using my skills and abilities to their best. And again, I'll say that effective employee engagement translates into a satisfied workforce, which we all know, and we all get that out of surveying our workforces. A strong majority of employees report they're satisfied with their current jobs. So that's a good thing, right? 70% of people right now are saying, I'm okay here. I'll get back to that issue of the turnover red zone. Right now we're seeing a developing trend that people who are on the job for less than 2 years, or people who are part of the millennial generation, are much more prone to be looking for work, much more prone to want to walk out the door. So if you are on the job for 2 to 3 years or less, 76% of those people expect to stay with their employer, 66% of those people expect to stay with their employer for the next 12 months. That means that 33% of people who are on the job less than 3 years are actively thinking about looking for a new job. A third of your workforce is actively thinking about this today. So employee tenure is completely correlated to turnover intention, and satisfaction certainly seems to dip as well amongst that 1 to 3 year range, as I just talked about. Once you get past that, people who are on the job 5+ years, only 15% of that group says, I'm actively thinking of looking for a job today. So there's a significant correlation between your ability to keep people on the job, develop them effectively, and have them then translate that into a desire to stay with your organization for the long run. As I just said, millennials certainly appear to be slightly ahead of the curve when it comes to their intention to leave. What we're also seeing right now is that Gen Xers are kind of leading the pack in terms of actively looking for that next job. Right now, what we see is that amongst the people looking to go elsewhere, there are about 56% of that group of people who said, I'm looking. 56% of that group are Gen Xers. So if we think about the expectations that we have about, it's the millennials who are moving everywhere. The millennials are actually looking too, in case you were wondering. About 40% of millennials, or about 40% of that group, pardon me, are millennials, and the rest are the boomers. Really interesting stat. When we asked about passively looking, right? So I'm not in the market, but boy, if somebody brought me something, I'd sure be interested. Your baby boomers are really open to that offer. They're not in the market because of the various pressures that the boomer generation might have right now between saving for retirement or putting kids through college or just working to get that nest egg salted away. But 44% of boomers said, yeah, I'm passively looking. So if something better comes along, maybe I'll take it. In our April 2011 report, we looked at the Gen Xers and really surmised that they were very frustrated about bumping up against what we at that time called the gray ceiling, right? So the Gen Xers being people born after 64, 65, and certainly that frustration seemed to be playing out. But in about a year's time, that subsided. So while the Gen Xers are certainly out looking, many of them received promotions in the past year. We actually found 21% of our Gen X respondents were promoted. So some of that is starting to subside, we're seeing. I think another interesting data point. 2 minutes? We're almost there. One last point I'll make, and before I summarize, is I'll come back to this issue of trust in leadership. It's really emerged as one of the most important retention factors, and it's a critical component of employee job satisfaction. So when we look at employees who are responding about trust in leadership, of people who plan to leave their organization, 27% said, I trust my leadership, and 62% who are staying said the same. So think about that disparity. 62% of people who want to stay trust their corporate leadership. 27% of people who are leaving say the same. That's a big disconnect. Ability to execute. If employees think their organization has the ability to execute strategy, they're far more likely to stay on the job. And effective communication. 62% of employees who plan to stay report that their employers communicate effectively. That's a nice number to tie to your next corporate strategy for communications, right? To talk about what that means for engagement and effective retention. So just to put a few takeaways out there. Some things to think about. One, focus on utilizing, engaging, and developing employee skills. The most satisfied employees are those who believe their talent and skills are being well utilized. Companies that neglect development challenges and promotion opportunities run increased risks of losing their best employees. Second, emphasize and reward authentic leadership. Trust in leadership translates into a more satisfied, committed, and engaged workforce. Leaders that don't build trust or can't demonstrate a commitment to execute strategy may not make for leaders of an employer of choice. And finally, don't underestimate returns on communications. As I just said, companies that communicate effectively and transparently are far more likely to engender trust, strengthen employee job satisfaction, and retain top workers. And can I get an hallelujah?
Thanks, Tom. That was really fascinating. I'm sure we can all relate to how important it is to have meaningful work for our own retention, right?